y'all doing? Nice to see you. I've been living in the last number of years in Chicago and Canada and Boston and New York, and I finally just got this idea. I saw the light, and 5 months ago moved west. So it's nice to be with you all here in LA. It's a good city to be in. A little bit about what I'm going to speak about in our little bit of time together. I grew up in a pretty privileged home where we fought over steaks at the dinner table. My father, my brother, myself literally would fight over these steaks at the table. For the last 7 years, I haven't eaten meat, and I've become a food activist in a number of different ways. And actually, there's a couple food activists here in the room. I'll name just three, just because they know more about this than I do. We got Rabbi Stephanie Colin from Just Congregations. Where are you at? All right. And then we got Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann from IKAR. Where are you at? Oh, there she is. And we have Amanda Gelb from Erlet Tzedek. All right, there she is. And there's a whole bunch of others. So there's a whole bunch of people who are passionate about this work. Two stories. I'm in Ghana, Africa, 2003. We would eat half of our food and, discard it in this garbage, and then someone took it somewhere, and then we realized they were burying it. And I woke up early one morning for a jog, and I realized that the community, the small village we were in, was digging out the garbage of out of the hole, the food that we thought was garbage, and that was their food for the day. And I started to see that the stuff that I was just tossing was the very dinner of these village people. A second snapshot was in Guatemala with some students about a year ago, and met many women whose husbands left their families in order to come and work in restaurants in the States, in order that they could send money back to their families so that their kids could get an education. Very profound stories of actually what sort of happened. I don't know if you saw this Times article recently that it used to be that folks immigrated up to the States to send money back down. Now actually the money's going the opposite way a little bit. There's some money from Latin America actually coming north. These stories have kept me up at night, thinking of these Ghanaians in the village who their food was my garbage, thinking of these women and their children in Guatemala who sent their husbands away just to ensure that their kids could go to school. And on the conversation of food justice and food deserts, which we'll speak a little about, this is fairly new to me. Only a couple years ago, I've always confused the words desert and dessert. Does anyone else have problems spelling those? Desert, dessert, like every time, So I always saw food desert, and I always just thought we're talking about dessert. And then I finally realized there was this other thing and started getting involved with that. But actually, I want to pause for 20 seconds. Turn to a person next to you. And when we say food justice, what are some issues that come to mind? Stay on topic. 20 seconds. Go for it. All right, let's bring it back. You could talk about that for a couple hours tonight. You could talk about this for a couple hours tonight, but I want to move forward. Hold on to those ideas. One of the texts that inspired me of how I thought about this, there was this guy named Natur. That's not actually his name, but these people have different names. A rabbi a couple hundred years ago, he says, and he's dealing with Jewish practice. He says, one who comes and says, feed me, right? Someone in the streets. We don't check to see if he's a trickster. Rather, we feed him immediately. If he were naked and comes and says, clothe me, then we investigate to see if he's a trickster, right? Has anyone else ever wondered about that? Someone asks you for money, you say, oh, is it good to give this in the street or not? Should I do this? And what he says, his Jewish advice, is that when it comes to clothes and anything not related to food, then we should be a little bit cautious and think about root problems and systemic change and this and that. But when it comes to food, immediately we have to address that. The urgency, the basic sense of human dignity and human need of having just basic food in our body, sort of the most basic human right in a certain sense. Where this came from for me, I want to share how I got involved with this stuff. So when I moved to LA, I actually thought I was moving to like Cesar Chavez land. Any other Cesar Chavez fans? I had this idea that like everybody here was like going to be Cesar Chavez in a certain sense. Like there was this hotbed of labor and immigrant activism and stuff, and that's what's going to happen. So 2008, May 11th, 2008, the largest immigration rate in US history. Right? Where does it happen? It happens at agri-processors, Rabushkins. Have you all heard of that? In Iowa. Postville, Iowa. 389 Guatemalan workers taken away that day. Shalom Rabushkin arrested, allegations of physical abuse, sexual abuse, underpaying workers, animal abuse, all these different issues. The organization I'm a part of, called Uri Tzedek, launched a national boycott. This was something unique, Jews boycotting other Jews in public. Say that this factory, agri-processors, they were producing 60% of the kosher meat in the country, 40% of the kosher chicken, and all across headlines across the world, we found that they were abusing their workers and animals and breaking other laws. And so we launched this boycott, but then we realized that boycotts weren't going to be the ultimate change. And so our friends in Israel inspired us. This is a case where there was great solidarity in the social justice movements between Israel and the States. And anybody heard of the Tav Chevrati? Okay, the Tav Chevrati is in Israel. It's in 350 restaurants. 250 are kosher, 100 are not kosher. And it certifies that the workers, usually Arab workers in the back, are being treated according to law. It certifies that the establishment is handicapped accessible. So if next time you're in Israel, you might ask the establishment if they have the Tav Chevrati or not, and why or why not. So we launched, inspired by them, the Tav HaYosher in the States. And the goal there for us was to say, we can't just launch boycotts. How do we get to a place where we get people to care as much about ethics as others do about kashrut? And so we set up this seal. It's now in 10 states and 60 establishments to ensure that we could affect the most vulnerable in our populations, those who are working in the back of food establishments. That's one snapshot. Happy to talk more about that if there's interest. But around this question of food deserts, can anybody give a basic definition? Food desert? Yes?
I was with PJA fellowship, so we learned about that last year. So my definition from them, more or less.
Great. Okay, so you use a very important word, which is access. So there's really three issues of access. One issue of access is just basic financial access. What can I afford? If you'll turn to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so in LA, it's a serious problem. Keep turning. Some questions, we'll skip over that too. And okay, fine, this is good. So in California, the minimum wage, as you know, is $8. That means that on a 40-hour week, you make $320. And if there was a 50-week work year, that would be $16,000. That means somebody who works 40 hours a week and makes $8 an hour minimum wage, they are going to have $16,000 a year. The poverty line is $18,310. That means a person who's making the minimum wage is $2,310 below the poverty line. Okay, if you'll turn to the next slide. Okay, according to recent studies, Americans tend to allocate 9.5% of their personal income on food. We spend about 10% of our money on food. So based on those figures I just gave you, this would translate to about $126.66 a month, or $4.22 a day for food. So someone who's making minimum wage has $4.22 a day for food. That's why they tend to buy a Wendy's bacon cheeseburger for $1, Wendy's crispy chicken sandwich for $1, Wendy's french fries for $1. These are the things that with this financial access they can afford. Next slide. Those who are on a middle class budget making $65,000 a year or $118 per week on food might spend $225 on an espresso or $18 on this nice salad here. Okay, so the first level of access is basic financial access. What can people afford based on the income they have? The second one is knowledge, the sense of the mental attitude or just the basic food knowledge of what is healthy food to eat, what is not. One of the big problems is, in fact, health itself. But most importantly, and the point you brought up, is physical access. They simply, in certain parts of LA, there are places that are food deserts, and that means you cannot access healthy, cheap food. Bringing new businesses there would solve three problems. One, it would help us to prevent certain preventable diseases. Secondly, it would help them to save money. And thirdly, it would provide jobs. But these businesses don't want to move there, even though it's in their interest. Three of the most common strategies to address this. One is to talk about basic business incentive, that it is in their interest to move to these parts of towns because these people do want to buy food and they actually cannot access cheap, healthy food they need. Another approach is a more political approach, which is for politicians, for government officials to offer incentives for those businesses to come to those parts of town. Or thirdly, to publicly shame those groups who actually won't and are not helping to enable that type of access. Actually, from what I heard, there's actually a group tomorrow who's going to the Superior, the Superior corporation at 2 o'clock to do a protest since they closed down their van service in Boyle Heights. The sense that they're preventing access. Okay, so I guess the last thing to say here, great, is that things to think about with food in regards to food justice. I'm curious if you thought of anything off of this list. There tend to be 7 things that I think of when I have this food in front of me. One is, who is the worker behind the counter? Who is the worker in the factory who produced this? How were they treated justly? Secondly, what's the impact on the environment with the product I'm eating? On a number of different levels, whether one chooses to get their vegetables from a CSA, or what country is this coming from. Thirdly, the animal, the sense of, is this coming from a place that's known to have animal abuses or not, whether one chooses to limit their meat intake. Fourthly is a question of trade, prioritizing fair trade products and products that ensure that the most vulnerable are getting proper wages. Next is sort of the spiritual component for myself. Saying a blessing on food and concerned with aspects of kashrut connected. And lastly, and I intentionally put it lastly, because I think that there's a hedonism that's come with our current food movement, which puts health as the main priority. That seems to be a dominant trend, and I think it's very scary. But I do think it is also important. So let me pause there. Nice to be with y'all.